Mr. Webb sends his regards. He suggested this would be the appropriate moment.
What is this?
Divorce proceedings.
The divorce papers were in Victoria's evening bag for the entire ball. She had placed them there herself at 6:30 before the carriage arrived, while her lady's maid was finishing the last of the pearl buttons on the back of her ivory gown. She had folded them once, a single fold, the kind that produced a clean crease rather than a crumpled one, and placed them in the silk evening bag with the quiet efficiency of someone completing a preparatory task, and she had then submitted to the finishing of the pearl buttons without any visible disturbance in her composure. Her lady's maid, Ellen, had been with her for 9 years and understood the difference between her mistress's composure when nothing was happening and her mistress's composure when something significant was being managed behind it. She had said nothing. She had finished the buttons. Victoria had looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. She was 37, which was 13 years older than she had been when she married Oliver Wentworth, Duke of Ashford, and she looked, she thought, like someone who had spent 13 years doing something and who was about to stop doing it, which was an accurate assessment. What she had been doing was managing Ashford House and the Ashford estate and the Ashford social obligations and the Ashford finances and the Ashford staff and every other component of a dukedom that required sustained, organised attention, which the Ashford dukedom had been receiving from her for 13 years and which it was not going to receive for much longer. She had picked up the evening bag. She had gone to the carriage. Oliver was already in it, which was unusual. He usually required her to wait, and he was dressed with the specific care that she had learned across several months of observation, was the care of a man dressing for an occasion that included someone he wanted to appear well for. His cravat was the newer one. His cufflinks were the gold ones. His hair had been attended to more thoroughly than his ordinary social occasions required. "Victoria," he said. "Oliver," she said, "you look well." He did not say she looked well, which was information. The Alderton Winter Ball was the most significant social event of the county's season, which meant it was attended by every family of consequence within 40 miles, and by a substantial number of families who considered the 40-mile journey worthwhile, and which meant that whatever happened at the Alderton Winter Ball was witnessed by approximately 300 people and discussed by approximately 3,000 within the week. Oliver knew this. Victoria knew this. She suspected from the quality of his attention as the carriage crossed into the Alderton Estates drive that he was aware of the audience and had organised the evening around it. She had also organised the evening around it, which was why the papers were in the evening bag. Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments, Victoria put the divorce papers in her evening bag at 6:30 before the carriage arrived and said nothing to Oliver about them. She sat beside him in the carriage for 40 minutes. What do you think she was thinking about during those 40 minutes? She was thinking about the Ashford Estate Trust. Not because the trust was the most important thing she had built, it was not. The most important thing was the network of financial instruments her father's banking concern had been quietly assembling on her behalf for 3 years. But because the trust was the most elegant thing she had built, and she had always found elegance satisfying in the way of things that produce maximum effect through minimum visible mechanism. Her father, Charles Cavendish, was 71 and had spent 50 years understanding how money moved through the English landed economy, and his assessment of Oliver Wentworth, delivered once at dinner in the 2nd year of the marriage and not revisited because he was a man who said things once and expected them to be understood, had been, "He will spend what he has, he will borrow what he doesn't, he will manage neither correctly." This assessment had taken the marriage 13 years to fully validate, which was longer than Charles had apparently expected. But the validation had arrived with the kind of thoroughness that her father had always found more satisfying than a quick result. Oliver had spent what he had across the first 5 years of the marriage, which was a considerable amount and which had been supported by the dowry Victoria had brought and the estate income she had steadily increased through systematic management of the Ashford agricultural tenancies. He had borrowed what he didn't have across the 6th through 10th years, through a series of arrangements with private lenders whose terms were unfavourable but whose discretion was reliable, which meant the debt had accumulated without becoming public. In the 11th year, Victoria had begun addressing the debt. Not because she was naive enough to believe that addressing his debt was addressing their marriage. She had understood by the 11th year that the marriage was what it was, and that understanding its limits was more productive than testing them, but because the debt, if left unaddressed, would affect the estate's functioning in ways that affected the tenants and the staff and the long-term viability of the agricultural income she had spent 11 years building. She had addressed it through a mechanism that her father's banking concern had designed, and that Webb, her solicitor, always her solicitor, never the Ashford family solicitor, had implemented with the thoroughness that good legal structure required. The mechanism was called the Ashford Agricultural Trust, which was a registered entity that held in its portfolio the agricultural income rights of the Ashford estate's 17 primary tenant farms. The trust had been funded at its establishment by the proceeds of a private bond issue that Victoria had organised through her father's concern, and it had been servicing Oliver's private debt through a set of arrangements that produced, from his perspective, the comfortable impression that the debt was being managed by the estate's ordinary income. The debt was not being managed by the estate's ordinary income. It was being managed by the trust, which answered to Victoria. This had been the arrangement for 2 years. In those 2 years, Oliver had made no inquiry about the mechanism by which his debt was being serviced, because the mechanism produced the outcome he wanted: reduced debt, no creditor pressure, continued social functioning, and he had always been more interested in outcomes than mechanisms. He had also, in those 2 years, become involved with Lady Arabella Hastings. Arabella was 31, which was 6 years younger than Victoria, and she had arrived in the county 18 months ago as the recently widowed daughter-in-law of Lord Fenwick, who was a neighbour of the Ashford estate, and whose house parties had produced, across 3 seasons, the social setting in which the involvement had developed from apparent friendship into what it currently was, which was what everyone in the room at the Alderton winter ball was going to understand within the first 30 minutes of the evening. Victoria had known about Arabella since October, which was 3 months ago. She had known because she paid attention, and because paying attention was what she had been doing for 13 years, and she was very good at it. She had used the 3 months to complete what needed completing. The papers in the evening bag had been drafted by Webb in November, reviewed by Victoria in early December, and were ready for presentation at a moment of her choosing. She had chosen this moment. She had chosen it because Oliver had chosen the Alderton winter ball as the occasion for his statement, which she had understood from the conversation she had overheard between his valet and the second footman in the 3rd week of November, which was a conversation she had not been supposed to hear, and which she had heard because she was frequently in parts of the house where people did not expect her to be. The Alderton winter ball was the most public occasion available in the county. Oliver was going to make a public statement. She had decided to make one too. The entrance to Alderton Hall at the height of the season had the quality of a stage. The double doors, the assembled staff, the long gallery beyond where the receiving line formed, the guests arriving in their carriages and entering with the awareness of being seen that county society always brought to significant occasions. Oliver entered with Victoria on his arm, which was the conventional entry. He found Arabella within 11 minutes of arrival, which Victoria recorded with the internal precision of someone who has been tracking a situation and is noting its developments. The first deviation from convention was that he brought her a glass of champagne, which was the gesture of a man attending to someone's comfort, and which he had not brought to Victoria. The second deviation was that he stood with her for 22 minutes without moving, which was long enough for the room to register that he was standing with her and not with his wife. The third deviation was the dance. It was the 4th dance of the evening, a waltz, and Oliver led Arabella onto the floor with the ease of a man who has decided that the audience is the point, and who has arranged himself for maximum visibility. Arabella accepted with the composed grace of a woman who knew what statement was being made and had decided to be its statement. Victoria was at the far end of the room when the dance began. She was speaking to Lady Whitmore about the County Charitable Committee's spring plans, which was a genuine conversation she had been intending to have regardless of the evening's other developments, because the Charitable Committee's spring plans required coordination, and Lady Whitmore was the person whose coordination she needed. She continued the conversation for 4 minutes after the dance began. She finished it when she was ready. Then she walked across the room. Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments, Victoria watched her husband dance with his mistress at the county's most important social event and then finished her conversation about the spring charitable plans before doing anything. 4 minutes. How do you think the room interpreted those 4 minutes? The room, by the time Victoria crossed it, had been watching for 7 minutes, the 4 of the charitable committee conversation and the 3 of the walk, which she did not hurry, because hurrying would have communicated something that she did not feel and did not intend to perform. She walked with the composure of a woman going somewhere she had decided to go, which was what she was doing. Oliver saw her coming. She watched him see her. He was mid-rotation in the waltz, facing the room, which was why he could see her, and the expression on his face in the moment he registered her direction was the expression of a man who had organized an evening to produce a specific effect, and who was encountering a development in the evening he had not organized. She reached the edge of the dance floor. She did not step onto it. She stood at its edge and she waited for the dance to end, because interrupting a dance was not the kind of statement she was making tonight. The dance ended. Oliver and Arabella completed their final turn and came to a stop approximately 6 feet from where Victoria was standing. Arabella saw her. Her expression did what expressions do when they are performing confidence and encounter something that disrupts the performance. Oliver looked at his wife with the expression of a man who has been positioned by his own decisions into a situation that has more geometry than he expected. Victoria opened her evening bag. She removed the folded document, which she unfolded once with the same unhurried efficiency she had applied to everything she had done this evening, and she held it out toward Oliver. "Oliver," she said, "Mr. Webb sends his regards. He suggested this would be the appropriate moment." Oliver looked at the document in her extended hand. He did not take it immediately, which was understandable. The document was a significant piece of paper, and taking it required understanding what it was, and he did not yet understand what it was. "What is this?" he said. "Divorce proceedings," she said. "Formal petition, signed, witnessed, filed with the county registry this morning. Webb has the registration number. Fitch will receive his copy Monday morning." Oliver stared at her. Arabella, to his left, was doing the arithmetic that the situation required. The room. Victoria was aware of the room with the lateral, cataloguing attention she always maintained at social occasions, had gone to the specific, collective quality of stillness that 300 people produce when they have all simultaneously understood that something significant is happening, and have all simultaneously decided to be very quiet, so as not to miss any of it. Oliver said, "This is not, Tory. This is not the place." "It is exactly the place," she said. "You chose the place. You chose this ball specifically because it was the most public occasion available. You made a statement here this evening in front of 300 people. I am responding to that statement in the same setting." He looked at the document. He looked at the room. He took the document. He did not open it there, on the dance floor, which was a display of social self-preservation that she had expected and had no objection to. The document was filed. The registration was confirmed. Whether he opened it now or in his study at 3 in the morning made no practical difference. "We should discuss this privately," he said. "We should," she agreed. "Webb and Fitch can arrange a meeting. I'd suggest early next week. There are several components of the settlement that will require some time to work through, and I'd prefer to have the conversation properly rather than in a corridor." She closed her evening bag. She looked at Arabella, who received the look with the composure of a woman who is managing a situation that has not gone the way she understood it was going to go. "Lady Hastings," Victoria said, with the warmth appropriate to a social acknowledgement, "I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening." Then she went back to Lady Whitmore and continued the charitable committee conversation, which had 3 points remaining on it that she had intended to cover. Lady Whitmore, who was 62 and had been navigating county society for 40 years, and who possessed the specific quality of a woman who had seen most things and was not easily surprised, received her return with the expression of someone who is not going to ask what just happened because she already understands it entirely.
They covered the 3 remaining points. Victoria departed the ball at 11:30, which was slightly earlier than she usually stayed, but not so early as to communicate retreat. She said her farewells in the appropriate order, Lord and Lady Alderton at the door, several guests she needed to acknowledge, and she departed with the composure of a woman who has had a productive evening.
In the carriage home, alone, Oliver had not come to the entrance with her, which she had expected. She looked out at the December fields and thought about Webb's meeting on Monday, and about the settlement components that were going to require Fitch's attention, and she thought about the Ashford Agricultural Trust, and what the Trust's existence meant for the settlement's architecture, and she thought about her father's assessment from the dinner in the 2nd year of the marriage. He will spend what he has. He will borrow what he doesn't. He will manage neither correctly. He had managed none of it correctly. She had managed all of it, which was why the settlement was going to look the way it was going to look. Before we continue, subscribe now and tell me in the comments. Victoria handed Oliver the divorce papers on the dance floor and then went back to finish her conversation about the charitable committee's spring plans. What does it tell you about a woman that the spring plans mattered as much as the divorce papers? The spring plans mattered because the spring plans required coordination that would affect the county's most vulnerable residents. The charitable committee's school funding initiative had been Victoria's project for 4 years and was reaching the point where the infrastructure was nearly complete, and the withdrawal of her active involvement would require a transition she wanted to have organised before she was no longer in the position to organise it. She had always managed both at once. This was the quality that 13 years of the Ashford marriage had required, and that had produced, as a secondary effect, the quality in her that Webb had once described, with the careful understatement of a solicitor who measures his words, as exceptional organisational capacity. Webb had been her solicitor since the 3rd year of the marriage, which was when she had understood, with the clarity that specific situations produce, that the Ashford family solicitor, Fitch, who had managed the Wentworth family's affairs for 26 years, was the Ashford family's solicitor and not hers, and that the distinction was going to matter. She had engaged Webb through her father's recommendation. Webb was 47 and had the quality of a solicitor who had been good at his work for long enough that the goodness had become structural. It was not effort. It was simply how he thought, and the thinking produced outcomes that were consistently better than the outcomes produced by people who were making similar efforts without the same foundational understanding. He had understood from the first meeting what Victoria needed. What she needed was a position. She had explained this with the directness she brought to all conversations that required directness, which was, she was married to a man who managed money poorly and who would eventually create a situation that required her to have independent resources and independent legal standing, and she wanted to build those resources and that standing before the situation arrived rather than after, because after was always worse. Webb had said he understood. He had also said, and this was the quality of Webb that she had come to value most, that he had a suggestion about the agricultural trust structure that he thought she should hear before she decided how to proceed. The suggestion was the Ashford Agricultural Trust. She had heard it. She had decided to proceed. The trust had taken 8 months to establish, because establishing it correctly required patience and the kind of legal precision that Webb brought to structures he intended to stand up under scrutiny. It had also required her father's banking concern to provide the initial bond issue, which Charles had agreed to in the way he agreed to things his daughter proposed that he found well considered, without ceremony, with a single nod, and with the immediate engagement of his concern's relevant department. The trust had been operational for 2 years when Oliver began the arrangement with Arabella. It had been operational for 2 years and 4 months when Victoria placed the divorce papers in her evening bag. In those 2 years and 4 months, the trust had managed Oliver's private debt with the efficiency of a financial instrument designed for exactly that purpose, which meant the creditors had been satisfied, the debt had reduced at a manageable pace, and Oliver had been entirely unaware of the mechanism by which this was happening, because the mechanism was invisible and its outcome was comfortable. She had not hidden the trust from him, technically. The trust's existence was a matter of public record at the county registry. If Oliver had reviewed the Ashford estate's financial architecture, which he had not, because he reviewed outcomes rather than mechanisms, he would have found the trust and understood its structure. He had not reviewed the architecture. The settlement meeting took place the following Tuesday at Webb's offices in the county town at 10 o'clock. Victoria arrived at 9:30. Oliver arrived at 11:15, which was 75 minutes late, which was the timing of a man who had been working himself up to something. Fitch arrived at 9:55, which was professional. Fitch was a competent solicitor who understood that his client's punctuality was not his punctuality, and who settled into the meeting room with the prepared quality of a man who had spent the Monday reviewing the divorce petition and had formed, from the reviewing, a clear picture of what the meeting was likely to contain. Oliver entered the meeting room with the expression of a man who had rehearsed something and who was managing the gap between the rehearsed version and the actual room, which was different from the rehearsed version because the actual room had 8 organized document folders on Victoria's side of the table and 2 blank legal pads on his side, and the difference communicated something before anyone spoke. "Victoria," he said. "Oliver," she said, "shall we begin? I have another meeting at 2. He sat down. Fitch opened his folder. Webb said, "Before we proceed to the petition's specific terms, I'd like to walk Lord Ashford through the financial architecture that will inform the settlement structure. I think it will be more efficient to establish the context before discussing the figures." Oliver looked at his solicitor. Fitch nodded, which was the nod of a man who had been briefed by Webb in a brief telephone call that morning, and who understood that being briefed by Webb was, in this instance, more useful than not being briefed. Webb opened the first folder. He placed a single document on the center of the table. "The Ashford Agricultural Trust," he said, "established 3 years ago. It holds the agricultural income rights to the 17 primary tenant farms of the Ashford estate. The trust was capitalized through a bond issue arranged by the Cavendish banking concern, Lady Ashford's family concern, and has been servicing Lord Ashford's private debt obligations since its establishment." He paused. "The trust's beneficial owner is Lady Ashford." Oliver looked at the document. Then he looked at Victoria. She looked back at him with the expression she had been using throughout the meeting, which was the expression of someone who has organized a meeting and is present while it proceeds as organized. "The private debt," Oliver said, "has been reduced by 63% in 2 years, Webb said, through the trust's income management. The servicing schedule is documented in folder 2. Oliver picked up the document from the center of the table. He read it with the quality of reading that people apply when they are trying to find the part that is wrong, which was not going to be productive because there was no part that was wrong. The trust was properly structured, properly registered, and had been operating exactly as designed. He set it down. "This is," he started, "legal and documented," Webb said pleasantly. "The trust's establishment is registered with the county authority. Lord Ashford's solicitor would have found it in a review of the estate's financial instruments." He looked at Fitch. Fitch had the expression of a solicitor managing the specific difficulty of acknowledging that a review he should have recommended had not been recommended. "The settlement," Oliver said. "You're saying the settlement is—" "The settlement will need to account for the trust's position," Webb said, "specifically for the fact that the agricultural income rights, which represent approximately 47% of the estate's total annual income, are held by the trust and not by the estate directly. The trust's future management and the income's allocation are matters that the settlement will need to address." Fitch leaned toward Oliver and said something quiet and short. Oliver absorbed it. He looked at the document again. He looked at Victoria. She waited. "When did you do this?" he said, not accusatorially. The question of a man trying to locate a thing in time. 3 years ago, she said. Webb recommended the trust structure. I agreed it was appropriate. The establishment took 8 months. 3 years ago, he said. 3 years ago was before Arabella, she said. Yes, the trust was established because the estate's financial structure required attention, and because I wanted to ensure that the agricultural income was managed sustainably, regardless of other circumstances. The trust was the appropriate instrument. "You were planning for this," he said. "I was planning for the range of circumstances that a careful person plans for," she said. "One of those circumstances has occurred." He was quiet for a long time. Outside the meeting room window, the December county was doing what December did, grey and cold and going on, the fields stripped to their structural forms, the kind of landscape that showed what was built rather than what was growing. Fitch produced a counter-question about the Trust's legal architecture, which Webb addressed with the organised patience of a man who has thought through every counter-question and has the answer ready. The counter-question was about the bond issue and whether the Cavendish banking concern's involvement constituted an undisclosed interest in the Ashford estate. Webb said it did not, because the bond issue was a commercial transaction between the Trust and the concern, and the Trust and the concern were separate legal entities, and the disclosure obligations applied to the estate's direct relationships rather than to instruments held by a registered trust that was itself a registered entity at the county authority. Fitch knew this. The counter-question had been an effort rather than a position. Oliver picked up the folder labelled Folder 2. He began reading the debt servicing schedule. He read for 12 minutes. The debt servicing schedule was detailed and accurate and showed, month by month for 2 years, the reduction of his private debt through the Trust's management. It showed the figure he had borrowed from. It showed the rate at which it had been reducing. It showed what the current balance was. The current balance was significantly lower than he had known it was. He had been given summary figures by Fitch which had been accurate, but the servicing schedule's detail made visible something that the summary figures had obscured, which was the rate of reduction and what that rate implied about the mechanism producing it. He set the folder down. He looked at Victoria with the expression that she had seen across the Monday and Tuesday in various partial forms, but which was arriving now in its complete version, which was the expression of a man who has been in a landscape he believed he understood and has discovered it had a geography he was never shown. "The charitable committee," he said. It was non sequitur. "The spring planning," she confirmed. "Yes, there are several things that need to be handed over before I'm no longer in the position to coordinate them. I've been managing the transition since October." "You've been managing the transition for 3 months," he said. "I've been managing the transition for 13 years, she said. 3 months is the final phase." He looked at the meeting table, at the 8 folders on her side, at the 2 blank pads on his, at the single document from the Trust in the centre that had organised the meeting around itself before the meeting properly began. "What do you want?" he said, the question that arrived in these conversations. "Several things," she said. "Webb has the full list, but I'll cover the significant ones. The dower house on the estate's southern boundary, I'd like it transferred to me as part of the settlement. Webb has had it valued and the valuation is in folder 6. Oliver nodded. "The trust continues," she said. "The agricultural income management stays as it is. The debt reduction completes on the current schedule. When the debt is fully serviced, which will be in approximately 14 months at the current rate, the trust's income allocation will shift. The terms of that shift are in folder 4. He reached for folder 4. "The shift is documented in detail," Webb said. "The short version is that when the debt is cleared, the agricultural income divides on a 60-40 basis. 60% returns to the estate's direct income. 40% remains in the trust, which Lady Ashford will manage for the purposes she determines." 40%, Oliver said. "Of the agricultural income," Webb said, "which represents 18.7% of the estate's total income. The calculation is on page 3 of folder 4. Oliver read page 3 of folder 4. He put it down. "The charitable committee work," she said. "I'll continue that independently of the estate. The committee has its own registered structure and I'm the registered trustee, which doesn't require any change." "Your name is on the committee," he said. "My maiden name," she said. "Victoria Cavendish. I've been using it on the committee's registration since the beginning. It was more appropriate given that the committee draws its funding from sources that are independent of the estate." He looked at her. "You've been signing the committee work as Cavendish," he said. Yes, she said, for 5 years. I didn't know that, he said. No, she said, you didn't ask. The meeting continued for 2 hours and 40 minutes after the trust revelation, during which Fitch raised 6 specific points about the settlement's terms, and Webb addressed 4 of them immediately, conceded a variation on 1, and indicated that the 6th required a brief adjournment to consult. The adjournment lasted 15 minutes. When they returned, Webb had a revised formulation of the 6th point that Fitch accepted with the professional efficiency of a man who is taking what is available and recognizes it as fair. The meeting concluded at 1:40, which was 20 minutes before Victoria's 2 o'clock appointment, which she had mentioned at the meeting's opening because it was true and because knowing she had a 2 o'clock appointment tended to produce efficiency in meetings. Oliver remained in the meeting room when Victoria and Webb gathered their documents. She paused at the door. He was looking at the 8 folders, which were stacked neatly because Webb had stacked them as part of concluding the meeting. The centre of the table was clear now. The trust document had been filed in its folder. The 2 blank pads on his side of the table were still blank because Oliver had not written on them. "Oliver," she said. He looked up. "The Dower House," she said. "I've been renovating it since September. It will be ready in March." He looked at her. "You started renovating the Dower House in September," he said. "The structural work needed doing regardless," she said. "The timing worked." "You knew in September." "I knew," she said, "that the situation was moving in a direction that would eventually produce this conversation. September was a reasonable time to begin the renovation given the lead time required." He was quiet. She said, "Fitch will contact Webb about the draft terms by Friday. I'd like the settlement finalized before the end of January if the timeline is achievable." "It's achievable," Fitch said from his side of the table. "Good," she said. "Thank you." She left the meeting room. She had her 2 o'clock appointment, which was with the county school board's secretary about the spring funding documentation for the charitable committee's initiative, which needed to be in a specific format to qualify for the county's matching funds scheme, and which she had been preparing for 2 months, and which was in the folder she was carrying. The appointment lasted an hour and produced what it needed to produce, which was the secretary's confirmation that the documentation was in the correct format and would be processed in the January cycle. She drove home. The Ashford Estates drive in December had the quality of a place that knows what it is. The old oaks on either side, the flint walls of the estate farms visible in the distance, the house at the end of the drive with the grey winter light on its stone. She had managed this estate for 13 years. She would manage the Dower House from March, which was smaller and better proportioned for one person, and which had a garden that she had been planning since September, in the moments between the trust management and the committee work and the meeting preparation and all the other things that constituted the organised interior life of a woman who had been paying attention to everything around her for 13 years. The Dower House garden faced south, which was ideal. The settlement was finalised on the 22nd of January, which was 3 days before Webb's preferred deadline. The terms were what Victoria had specified, with the minor variation Fitch had negotiated on the 6th point, which was a reasonable variation that she had expected and had factored into her original position. Oliver signed first, which was the convention. She signed second. Webb notarized. Fitch notarized. It was done. Oliver remained at the table afterward, in the way he had remained in the meeting room on the Tuesday, which was the way of a man who has completed something significant and is sitting with the completion. She was organising her copy of the settlement into the folder that Webb had prepared. "The county," he said. "What they'll say." "People will discuss it," she said. "For a season. Then something else will happen and they'll discuss that. County society has a short attention span for situations that are resolved." She looked at him. The ball was a much more significant public moment than the settlement. The settlement is a legal document. The ball was a statement. "I know," he said. "You chose the ball," she said, "not me." "I know," he said again. She closed her folder. "Oliver," she said, "the trust will complete the debt servicing in 14 months. When it completes, Fitch should review the estate's financial architecture. The architecture as it currently stands is functional, but it was designed around specific circumstances that will no longer apply after the settlement. It should be reviewed with that in mind. He looked at her. "You're advising me on the estate," he said. "The estate has 17 tenant families on it," she said. "They deserve a financial architecture that works. The advice isn't for you." He almost said something. She could see him assembling it, the beginning of something that was either an apology or an acknowledgement, or the managed version of one of those things. She picked up her folder. "Webb will send you the Dower House transfer confirmation when the county registry processes it," she said. "He expects that by the end of February." She left. The Dower House was ready in March, as she had anticipated. She moved on a Wednesday because she liked Wednesdays. There was something about the positioning of Wednesday in the week, the sense of being in the middle of something and oriented toward the other side, that she had always found productive. The south-facing garden was still bare in March, which was the correct state for a garden in March. She had the plans for it, the structural planting, the paths, the section by the old stone wall that got the afternoon light and which she intended for the roses. The roses would take 2 years to establish. She had planned for that. In April, the county school board secretary wrote to confirm that the charitable committee's spring funding had been processed and that the first disbursement to the participating schools would be made in May, which was the timeline she had been working toward for 4 years. She read the letter at the Dower House desk, which faced the south garden, which was beginning to show the first signs of spring, the bulbs she had planted in October coming through, which she had anticipated because she had planted the variety that came through earliest and which gave the garden a quality of life in April, when most gardens in the county were still dormant. She wrote back to the secretary with the organizational instructions for the May disbursement process, which she had drafted in January and which she had been holding until the funding confirmation arrived. She sent the letter. She returned to the garden plan. The roses in the section by the old stone wall were going to be the David Austin varieties that her mother had grown in the garden in Derbyshire, the ones with the specific quality of fragrance that was strongest in the late afternoon when the day's warmth had collected in the stone wall and released through the evening. 2 years to establish. She had time. In May, the schools received their first disbursements, which funded teacher training in the northern parishes and materials for the eastern schools' science programs and a library expansion at the central school that had been on the committee's list for 3 years and which was now, finally, funded properly. She received the processing confirmations and filed them in the charitable committee's records, which she maintained with the same organized attention she had always maintained records, which was the attention of someone who understood that records were the evidence of what had actually happened, rather than what people remembered having happened. In June, Webb wrote to confirm that the Trust's debt servicing schedule was proceeding and that the 14-month completion estimate was tracking accurately. She wrote back and confirmed she had noted the update. In August, the Dower House roses were planted. They were the variety she had chosen, from the grower her mother had used, ordered in March and delivered in July, and planted in August by the gardener she had hired, a man named Thomas Aldred, who had 20 years of experience with heritage roses, and who had, when she described what she wanted for the stone wall section, said that the afternoon light and the stone's heat retention were ideal for the variety she had chosen. 2 years to establish, he had said. I know, she had said. That's fine. She watched him plant them with the focused attention of someone who finds the planting of things genuinely interesting, the specific decisions about depth and spacing and orientation, the way someone with experience approached the problem of a wall that would shape the rose's growth. You understand gardens, Thomas Aldred said, which was not a compliment but an observation. I'd been reading about them for several months, she said. There's a significant difference between reading and understanding. Less than most people think, he said, if you read carefully. In September, 1 year after the renovation, 14 months after the ball, the Ashford Agricultural Trust completed its debt servicing. Webb wrote to confirm the completion and to note that the income allocation shift, per the settlement terms, would take effect from October 1st. She wrote back and confirmed she had noted it. She also, in the same week, wrote to the county school board secretary about the committee's autumn planning cycle, which needed to begin in October to meet the spring funding timeline, and which she had been preparing for since August. On a Thursday afternoon in October, she was in the south garden when she heard the car on the Dower House drive. It was Oliver. He was older looking than he had been at the ball, which was 12 months' worth of older, and which was also the older that came from a year of managing an estate's financial architecture without the person who had been managing it. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been paying more attention to things than he was accustomed to paying attention to, which was visible in the specific quality of someone who has been working at something they had previously delegated. "Victoria," he said. "Oliver," she said. "Come in, I'll make tea." She made tea. She did not ask why he had come, because asking why people had come produced the managed version of what they were there to say, and she preferred the direct version. He sat in the Dower House sitting room, which was smaller than anything at Ashford House, and which had the quality of a room organised for one person's use rather than for the social functions of a dukedom. "The trust," he said. "Yes," she said. "The income shift has produced a gap," he said, "in the estate's direct income. Fitch says it's a restructuring requirement." "It is," she said. "The architecture was designed around the debt servicing. Without the debt servicing, the architecture needs adjustment. Fitch should review it." "I told him to review it," he said. "He's been reviewing it for 3 weeks. What has he found?" "He has found," Oliver said, with the expression of a man reporting something he finds difficult to report, "that the architecture is not what he understood it to be, that several of the tenant arrangements and the supply contract structures have been renegotiated, in his word, in ways that are more favourable than what he had in the files." "I renegotiated several of them," she said. "Over the years, the original arrangements were suboptimal." He wants to know how much of the estate's current income performance is attributable to the renegotiations. "Webb has that information," she said. "It's documented. I can ask him to share it with Fitch." "He also wants to know," Oliver stopped. She waited. "He wants to know if there are other structures he isn't aware of," Oliver said. She looked at him. "There are no structures that aren't documented," she said. "Everything is registered and recorded. The issue is that Fitch has not reviewed the documentation in a way that produced a complete picture. If he reviews it properly, he'll find everything there is to find." "He should have reviewed it," Oliver said. "Yes," she said. "He should have." He looked at the Dower House sitting room, at the organised desk, the familiar books that had been in her rooms at Ashford House, the garden visible through the window where the first-year roses were establishing their root systems in the October soil. "The roses," he said. "Thomas Aldred planted them in August," she said. 2 years to establish. They'll be flowering by next autumn." "You planned this in September," he said. "The renovation, the garden." "I planned the structure in September," she said. "The growth takes its own time." He was quiet. He looked like a man who had come to say something and was finding it harder to say than he had anticipated, which was frequently the case with things worth saying. "The estate," he said. I've been reading the files. The ones in the estate office, 13 years of them." She looked at him. "The Henderson tenancy review from year 4, he said. "The supply contract work in year 6th. The school funding application in year 9 that produced the county matching arrangement." "Yes," she said. "The files are very thorough," he said. "I kept thorough records," she said. He looked at the garden. "I didn't know," he said, which was the sentence he had been assembling and which he delivered with the quality of someone saying something that is true and insufficient simultaneously, which was the condition of most honest admissions. "No," she said. "You didn't ask." They sat with this for a moment. The October garden was doing what October gardens do, the last warmth leaving, the structure becoming visible, the things that were planted showing their shapes without the covering of growth. "Is there anything in the files," he said, "that Fitch should particularly understand about the restructuring, that you'd be willing to tell him?" She thought about this. "The North Farm drainage arrangement," she said. "Year 8. I renegotiated the drainage maintenance contract with a regional engineering firm rather than the estate's traditional contractor, because the traditional contractor had been underperforming on the south section for 2 years without the estate noticing. The new arrangement is better value and better quality. Fitch will find it in the Year 8 files, but the context for why the switch was made is in the Year 6 maintenance reports. He needs both. Oliver nodded and produced from his coat pocket a small notebook which he opened. She looked at the notebook. She said, "You brought a notebook?" "Fitch suggested it," he said. "He said if I came to ask questions I should write down the answers." "Fitch was right," she said. "Write down the North Farm drainage. Year 8 for the contract, Year 6 for the context." He wrote it down. "What else?" he said. She told him about the Henderson tenancy's lease structure, which had a specific clause that required annual review, and which she had been reviewing annually for 9 years, and which was going to require a decision about renewal in the spring. She told him about the supply contract for the estate's timber processing, which had been on a favourable rate she had negotiated in Year 7, and which expired in 18 months, and would need renegotiation before it expired. She told him about the south boundary wall, which had a section that was going to require attention before the following winter, because she had noted the deterioration in August and had been planning to commission the survey before the settlement made the commissioning someone else's responsibility. He wrote all of it down. She watched him write with the organised attention she brought to most things, and she thought about 13 years of information passing through her mind and into files, and producing outcomes that had been attributed to the estate's natural function by the man who was now writing in a notebook things she was telling him the estate needed. When she had finished what she intended to tell him, she said, "That's what I think is most time-sensitive. The rest is in the files." "Thank you," he said. "The information is for the estate," she said, "not for you. The people on the estate deserve a landlord who understands what they need." "I know," he said. "I'm trying to understand it." She looked at him. She thought about the ball and the dance and the papers in the evening bag, and the meeting room on the Tuesday, and the trust, and the dower house, and the roses in the ground, and the schools funded, and the October garden, and the notebook in Oliver's hand with the things she had told him. "Read the files," she said. "All of them. Not the summaries, the actual files. It will take time. The context is in the details." He nodded. He stood. He looked at the garden one more time. "The roses," he said. "Next autumn." "If the establishment goes well," she said. "Thomas Aldred thinks it will." He left. She went back to the garden. The October light was doing what it did, flattening, going golden, the short quality of an autumn afternoon that was almost finished. She walked to the section by the stone wall and looked at the rose canes, which were new wood and had the green under-brown quality of things that were alive and establishing and had not yet shown what they were going to become. 2 years. She was a person who understood that the right things took the time they took, and that being in position when they arrived was the important part. She had been in position. The roses would come when they came. She walked back to the house. The charitable committee's autumn planning documentation was on the desk. She sat down. She picked up her pen. She continued.